Blog Talk Radio.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are listening out there across the planet Earth. Welcome to Vestiges After Dark. And I am your host, Bishop Bryan Ouellette, coming to you live on this June 22nd, 2021. Tonight we're talking about Zozo. And we have the expert on this subject with us tonight, Darren Evans. He's going to give us some new insights, perhaps, and we'll be talking about the nature of this phenomenon, whether it is what people think it is, the realities, the myths. We've got 2 hours of this tonight, and we'll be taking your calls and questions from both the chat room and calling into the show. That number to call, if you want to get into the queue now, is 516-453-0138. We got a great one. Don't go away. Well, welcome everyone to tonight's show on Zozo and exploring this phenomenon in much more detail than perhaps we did last time. And this time we're going to be taking your questions and calls. So I hope you're ready to call in tonight. I hope that we have a lot of interaction from the audience, because I know that one of the primary things that we get in terms of caseloads, one of the reoccurring themes, one of the primary reoccurring themes that we see in our caseloads are people talking about Zozo. So I know it's a question that's on a lot of your minds. Here's your opportunity to ask the expert in this. So tonight we're going to be covering that. But first, just a few quick announcements. First, I just want to remind everybody that the Nicolaitan channel, actually the Nicolaitan website, okay, which you can access through nicolaitan.org. That's NICHOLEAN.org. As well as esotericcatholic.org. Both of them are the same website. Two URLs get you to the same place. And if you go over there and click on Gift Shop, there are some items there that are currently available for a pledge. that helps support this show. So if you want to help this show continue to flourish and so that we can continue to make it even bigger and better in coming seasons, if you want more episodes, then we need your support. And here's a way that you can support the show and still get something back, because everything in the gift shop is essentially technically free. These are gifts that you get when you pledge a monthly amount. So we have glow-in-the-dark rosaries on there. We have St. Benedict medals and prayer cards. And soon we will have some blessing kits as well. And also some other rosaries that will be up on there in the coming weeks. And this is just a way that you can help support the ministry, and you get something that has been blessed directly by me. I blessed all of these items. The St. Benedict medals actually have an exorcism applied to them. And these are the same medals that we have used on Ghost Adventures as well as in our field work that is off the air. These are things that can definitely help. And like I said, for a monthly pledge, you can get one of these sent to you for free. And that's just my first announcement. My second announcement is a question that came in on social media. I did not answer it. It was on Twitter. I did not answer it because I felt that I could not do the question justice because of the limitations on Twitter, and I thought it's an important enough subject. It's definitely current news, and I think I need to respond to it. So hopefully that individual that asked it is listening tonight. But the question they asked was, can the Catholic Church deny someone who is a baptized Catholic and member of the religion in every official sense? Can the Catholic Church deny someone the Eucharist? And this is, I think, relating to the position that the Church is formulating against, I guess, Joe Biden regarding his pro-choice, some might say pro-abortion position. And there's been talk about depriving him of the Eucharist, being a high-profile Catholic who is publicly standing against Catholic teaching in this regard. And they wanted to know whether or not the Roman Catholic Church has the authority to deprive him of the Eucharist in this way. And the answer to that is yes, because the sacraments of the Church are governed by the Church. God gave the grace and power of those sacraments to the Church, and the Church has the ability to make whatever determinations they feel is necessary in order to safeguard the nature and the integrity of those sacraments. Now, whether or not they should exercise this authority in this particular situation, I think, is a completely different question. And what I really think it amounts to as an issue is missing the entire point. Because certainly if a person in the Roman Catholic Church, as well as the Nicolaitan Church, sees abortion as a grave sin, something that is, it's something that could be resulting in excommunication, but it's a grave sin, it's a mortal sin, okay, by both Roman Catholic and Nicolaitan Catholic standards, but we have completely different approaches to dealing with it. Roman Catholic Church does an immediate excommunication, although in this particular case, with the position that Biden has on it, it's a little bit different because we're talking about policy, okay? And I'll get to that in a moment. But what I wanted to mention, to completely answer the question, you can see here why there's no way I could answer this correctly on Twitter, is that the main thing is, when somebody is in grave sin, they need the grace of the Church the most. So depriving them of that grace seems to be counterproductive, and oftentimes the result is exactly that. It drives people away for good, when perhaps the only salvific action that could save them in a Roman Catholic sense or a Judeo-Christian sense is the very thing that they are now being deprived of as a punishment for having a particular position or having done something that is of grave matter. So honestly, in this particular regard, I don't think there's really ever a justification for depriving someone of the Eucharist. I think that is something that they should be educated in. However, if somebody in the church, particularly a clergyman or ideally a confessor, were to find that an individual is in violation of, or is in mortal sin, let's just leave it, let's keep it simple. If a person is in mortal sin, then how about encouraging them with the means to rectify it rather than throwing mandates at them that say, we're kicking you out. I don't, our church does not do that. Our church educates. Our church does not react that way. We're not legalistic in that sense. The Roman Catholic Church is very legalistic. So I disagree with their approach to it. But with regards to Joe Biden, it's even a completely different matter, because we're not talking about his individual views here. And those are the only things, his individual actions, his individual position, what he personally believes for himself, is the only thing that really could deprive him of the sacraments in this regard. Forming policy for the entire country is a whole different matter. Do we want, how about if a Muslim were to become president one day and start enforcing Muslim religious positions on the entire American public? Would we want that? As Christians, would we want that? Of course not. So why would we as Christians think that it's acceptable to push our position, which is pro-life, on the entire country? It's irresponsible to do that. And the only way to protect the integrity of the freedom of religion is to not do that. Okay? So I disagree with this depriving Joe Biden of the Eucharist. I think that is a reprehensible stance. But can the Roman Catholic Church do this? Yes, they have the authority to do that, and God gave the church the authority to do that. So whether you agree with it or not, the question is, the answer to the question is that. But I needed to, I think, qualify it with my own positions, and particularly as to how the Nicolaitan Church differs a bit on this. We don't see abortion in any less severity than the Roman Catholic Church does. We still see it as grave sin. We still see it as mortal sin, but we handle it completely differently. We encourage the sacraments when people are falling into sins that are that severe. We do not deprive them of it. They need the grace the most, and I will never yield on that. Joining us tonight is Sister Mary Joan. Hello, Sister. How are you doing?
Good evening, everyone. Hope you're doing well.
Yeah. Starting off the show with a heavy matter, but I mean, I guess this is a heavy show, so
Yeah. Well, it needs to be discussed.
Yeah. Well, people are asking, and I mean, obviously, they're coming to me for those kinds of answers, which is understandable, but at the same time, it's something that I think people need to understand where we differ in this respect, and philosophically.
Yeah, at least get our view on it, because some people are going to assume, everything we do is in line with Rome as well.
Or they assume that everything we do is not in line with Rome, but they don't seem to understand the fact that one can be mostly in line with Rome, with the exception of just a few minor issues.
Oh, no, that's not allowed. You're all in or you're not.
Exactly. Everyone is black and white.
Right.
Everything is got to be this or that. Free thought is practically dead. You have to follow the paradigm. You got to put yourself in that box. You need to build categories. If we don't have categories, let's make more categories. That's what people do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I don't go for that bullshit, and I never will. And if you don't like it, well, too bad. I know you like it, though, Sister. Oh, goodness.
I love the drama.
Yeah, you got to love it.
The drama.
You got to love it. Okay. Well, enough of that. I just like to always start the show off with, the weekly happenings, and that was the weekly happening. It was important. The other thing I want to say, just in case we run out of time, because I know that once we get really started with this topic, we're probably going to lose track of time. Those 2 hours go really quickly. So I just wanted to announce that we have a very, very special broadcast coming up here. So technically speaking, tonight's episode, Exploring Zozo with Darren Evans, this is going to be the last episode of this season. This is season 3 of Vestiges After Dark, and tonight's the last episode. We're going to go dark for a few weeks, with the exception of, to break it up so it's not going to be like, too long a period of time, we have a special episode coming up after tonight's episode, the next episode of Vestiges After Dark will be July 7th. That's on a Wednesday. Okay, it's a different night. And we are going to have Eugenie Bondurant on the show. She is the occultist from the movie The Conjuring 3. So if you saw Conjuring 3 and if you know what went on in that movie, I don't want to give away anything in case some of you haven't seen it yet, but she plays the role of the occultist, and that's all I'm going to say about it. But if you haven't seen it, then you won't want to. If you haven't seen it by July 7th, then you don't want to listen to that show, because we're going to be talking a lot about it, particularly how dark archetypes affect actors. And so Eugenie is a wonderful friend of ours. We've spent many, many times talking about deep philosophical subject matter, and I thought, what a better way to move forward with, talking about Conjuring 3 and everything, and my involvement with the movie and her involvement with the movie, than to have an actual broadcast where we talk about the things that we talk about when we get together. So that's going to be a really good show. That's July 7th on a Wednesday. That's going to be the next show, but that's going to be a mid-season a between-season episode, okay? So we're not going to be regular for the next few weeks. Probably be coming back towards the end of August, I anticipate. And that's what we'll come back with weekly Tuesday night shows, okay? I just wanted to make sure that I got that out there. Didn't want to wait till the end of the show and find out that, we're out of time and I wasn't able to say what I needed to say. So there you go. That's what's coming up here. And so without any further delay, let's go ahead and get started with tonight's topic. So our guest tonight is Darren Evans. He's been on the show before. You know him from Ghost Adventures. He's been on several times, 3-4 times, I think. He'll correct me if I'm wrong on that. But Darren Evans is a paranormal researcher from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Like I said, he's been on Ghost Adventures several times, and he is what he considers to be a paranormal survivor of years of problems with Zozo, starting with his board activity in 1982. Evans has been featured on television programs. I think he's been on A Haunting. He's been on. He's even been involved in a motion picture about himself, I believe, as I Am Zozo. So. Really interesting stuff. He's played himself in films, and he has pioneered the research on the Zozo phenomenon, revealing it to be a worldwide, let's call it a threat, because I'm seeing that it's definitely a threat. Sister Mary Joan, we just recently had a new case that came in with Zozo, did we not?
Yeah, we still have several in the queue mentioning Zozo as well.
Yeah.
So it seems to be in an uptick right now.
It does, and it does seem to ebb and flow, and so hopefully Darren can enlighten us tonight on that. But like I said, without any further delay, let's go ahead and bring and welcome back to Vestiges After Dark, Darren Evans. How are you tonight, Darren?
Bryan, Sister Mary Joan, doing very well. Thank you for having me. It's good to be back on. And
hey, buddy, good to have you.
Yeah, right here in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Awesome. Yeah, you're no longer out in Vegas. You're back in your home state.
Went back home, and I've throughout my long travels, I've really traveled a lot around the United States. But I always come back home to Tulsa. It's always good to be back home. And since I lived in Vegas for a couple of years, we met in Vegas a couple of times and had some great times. But I just really couldn't get used to the heat, that dry heat. I've been used to more of a humidity.
Yeah.
And it really takes when you it's one thing to visit in Vegas, but it's an entirely different thing when you live there. And it's really tough on a guy like me, that works outside a lot. And but yeah, it's good to be back home in Tulsa, where I'm from. Got a really cool business, and things are going very well here in Tulsa. But guys, thanks for having me back on Vestiges After Dark. What's up, y'all?
I'm so happy that you're joining us tonight, and you always have so much.
Yes, sir.
information to contribute to the topic at hand. We've had you on for Zozo, but we'll probably invite you back for some other topics if you want to discuss other things that you've done in the paranormal. I know it's more than just Zozo, but I know Zozo's the big topic we haven't talked about in a while. I don't think you've been on. It's been more than a year since you've been on this show. So and I wasn't doing.
Yeah, it's been a minute.
Yeah, and I didn't do a lot of episodes for season 2. It was back in season 1, I think, that we had Darren on. And so, honestly, what's going on with Zozo right now? Darren, has anything been happening that is new that since the last time we got together?
It's been a roller coaster ride for like the last 14 years when it comes to this phenomenon that I basically am known for exposing to the paranormal world, to the world at large. For decades, unsuspecting users of spirit boards have been pestered and some attacked by an entity that's calls itself Zozo. Evenings of entertainment have ended in anxiety and fear with lingering problems, ranging from hauntings to dream invasion to straight up psychological terror for people. And so to try to answer your question about the recent, I still get emails from people that are still putting the dots together with their early experiences of that involved spirit boards that seem to have, again, lingering issues. And a lot's happened in the last couple of years since I was on last time. Of course, that was pre-COVID.
Yeah.
And, Bryan, you and I got into some it stands out in my memory as one of the most productive conversations I've had involving this multifaceted phenomenon that involves spirit board and my involvement with this entity or sigil or whatever it may be. And last time we got into a lot of different, and I'm sure we will again, and it's like in the early 80s when I first started having sessions on boards, it was all on a board that was found underneath my girlfriend's house in West Tulsa, right along the banks of the Arkansas River, right next to the levee on 49th and Charles Page, West Tulsa.
Right.
There was a strange board found underneath her house. I lived across the street, and I'll never forget that this board that was underneath the house it was sunk in mud. The only reason it was found is because it was surrounded by jars of old lightning jars. And I'll never forget pulling one of those jars out from underneath this house and holding it up to the sun, and it had a white chalky substance on it. And I'll never forget wiping that off with a towel, and just looking at the jar itself was an incredible thing because it was an old lightning jar, very old,
Yeah.
Never seen one like that. And again, it had a chalky substance on it. I wiped that substance off. I held it up to the light, and there was a preserved blackbird.
Oh my!
That had been sitting there for a long time. And I remember,
that
what
could
the
be a
hell is
problem.
going on?
Yeah, that's a problem.
And then the board was brought up.
Yeah.
The first thing we noticed was the jars that were surrounding on each corner of this board where it was, put by someone, I don't know who, but that was my first exposure to it back in 1982. We found a board that was double-sided, and it was like a work of art. On one side was an old William Fold talking board. Said Ouija on it.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never seen one before, didn't know what the hell it was, but I did know that my girlfriend's mother was heavily involved in, she was a white witch. She believed in fairies. She believed in, the whole witchcraft thing and, the whole pagan, I began to learn from her. This was before that was even discovered by a plumber. They had some plumbing issues. But anyway, we were told to stay off that board because on the other side of the board, somebody had cut a board. It was one of the larger, earlier vintage William fold board with the square corners. The large one's made out of real wood, bird's
Yeah, I
eye
was gonna
maple.
say made out of real wood. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
we're not
and a
talking
very
Parker
strange
Brothers
wood
here.
grain.
We're not talking like some modified Parker Brothers. Yeah.
No, we're talking an older, 30-something model.
Mm-hmm.
Is what I traced it to back, But I had never seen a board, so I assumed that they were all double-sided. But it was on, and there's some controversy. Let me just get to the part of the controversy. A lot of people that disbelieve this phenomenon think that I made it up or for whatever reason. There's some controversy about this double-sided board because the naysayers say, well, he said one side's the William Fold, one side's the Zozo side. But that is correct. There was one side that, like I said, was a standard William Fold board, very large, bird's eye maple. But the other side was handcrafted board that had its own symbols, it had the Zozo on the same where Ouija should be. It had Zozo there.
Oh wow.
And I'm
interesting.
thinking, and I admit in my book that I was a big Led Zeppelin fan back then. This is in the early
the
80s.
album cover. Yeah.
I've been playing guitar since I was 6 years old. Stairway to Heaven is one of the first songs I ever learned on the guitar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so when we find this Ouija board that has Zozo on the side of it, I'm thinking, well, what the fuck, man? Excuse my language.
No, you're
You
fine.
may have to edit that. I
No,
apologize.
it's
Well,
the internet. There's no FAA or FCC.
I forget. I forget. I'm not just talking to you guys. We're being recorded. I got to remember that.
No, you're good.
It was just like I put the connection there. And so a lot of people said, well, you know what? He was into Zeppelin, so he made this whole thing up. I can I strongly just say to people out there that may have think that I've made this whole thing up. I encourage them to go to unsolvedmysteries.com and look up Zozo, and you will see stories that have been grouped together since the late 90s, and that was one of the first things that, to move forward in time. When in the 90s when the internet came out, I was still on the board. I was still having very freaky experiences for years and years. I was one of them guys that if you didn't believe in the spirit world, you could call me and I'd bring my wife up there and we would sit down and we would, bring various devices with us, which were available at the time, which back then was earth, wind, and fire, old school.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We'd have a little mortar with some earth in it. We'd light candles and we'd bring a board and we would see what happened. And things happen time and time and time again, where I became too obsessed with it to be with a family. Like I wind up losing my marriage. I did it so much. I was traveling all over the country, and I would go to graveyard. Anybody that would do it with me, I would do it with them.
Well, it becomes an
it got to
obsession,
the point.
and you kind of lose track of yourself.
Oh, yeah.
So I get that. Yeah, I get that.
It was very obsessive, and then later on, 30 years later, I worked cases involving people that are super obsessive with this Ouija contact, this method of spirit communication.
Well, I want to mention, because I remember back when we were still, I think it was on Facebook. I've since abandoned Facebook. I mean, we still have the public page up there for my public, I guess, the people that follow me there for the work that I do. But my private one is gone. I got rid of it because I couldn't stand Facebook.
Sure.
But I remember back when we were communicating frequently on Facebook, and there was a lot of controversy that came up, and somebody, I don't remember who it was, accused you of making this whole thing up. And I wanted to set the record straight. Okay, there's a volume. It's a 2-volume set that I possess here, that was first originally published in 1818. It is in English referred to as the Infernal Dictionary.
Infernal Dictionary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in that, you can look up Zozo. It actually moves you to the section on possessed, and it states very clearly that in 1816 in France, okay, there, I'm paraphrasing this from the book, there was a girl,
Little girl.
who was said to be possessed. And after some, I guess, ecclesiastical intervention, it was determined that there were 3 demons that were possessing her. This is, again, 1816. Okay, just a couple years before this volume was published originally. And those 3 demons were named Meanie, Ouellette, and Zozo. So there's no way you were, unless you're a time traveler, Darren, you weren't around back in the early 1800s, I'm guessing.
Well, it even predates that.
Well, it does. It does. But what I'm trying to say is this is an official volume that the church has used for for a long time. I mean, this is something that is an established part of demonology. Anybody who is serious about demonology knows about this book. Okay, and it's a great volume. It gives a lot of insight. I mean, some of the things I think go off on some of the superstitious tangents that the church has adopted about demons, but overall, it's a very good look into demons as the church would understand it. And there it is. Zozo is listed in there as having been identified in the early 1800s with the possession of this girl along with 2 other demons. So there you go. Darren Evans did not invent the Zozo phenomenon.
No.
I just want to set that record straight because I know that, what you have studied and what you have found, and I know that we'll talk about this, hopefully in a few moments, but I know that your research has taken you back a long time, like thousands of years, right? You've seen evidence of Zozo.
Absolutely, and that's those references to Zozo as a demonic entity is very disturbing to not only the believers but the ones that don't believe in this phenomenon.
Yeah.
That portray it as something that's been made up, and it's interesting that you mentioned the dictionary in Farnell. Written in various editions in the 1800s.
Yeah.
The first one in 1816, Colin de Planty's book, was, it was written 80 years before Zozo was mentioned on the internet.
Yeah.
And so this causes a problem for those who think that I just made this stuff up. And it's that's not the only mention, but it is a very fascinating one.
Yeah.
Because the whole Picardy region has been an area of scandalous cases of demonic possession. In this village, near the city of Amiens, a girl got pregnant, and to hide this accident, she published that she was possessed by, because of this pregnancy, she got supposedly possessed by 3 devilkins, or imps as it was known, over there in Italy.
Mm-hmm.
Devilkin. There's a word you don't hear every day.
No, you don't.
But yes, Meanie, Zozo, and Ouellette.
Yeah, it would be in French, right? So it would be Ouellette. You're right. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because and that word Ouellette, that could be involved in this affair, this triangular affair, because it's a good philanderer, as it is known in French. But anyway, the girl, her name was Beth.
Yeah.
She went on the streets on all fours, sometimes forward, sometimes backwards, not unlike you might see in the director's cut of The Exorcist going down the stairs.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes she walked on her hands, feet in the air. Now, as I read this, I have a friend over that translated that particular part of the Dictionary Infernal written in 1818, and I'm reading from that now that she had feet in the air. At the risk of revealing her pregnancy to the citizens, the devilkin Mimi pushed her forward. Zozo pulled her backward, and the malignant Ouellette held her legs in the air. And an old son of Loyola, a Jesuit prophet, I guess, in the runway of good adventures and who recognized the devilkins to good intuition, seized the girl and performed an exorcism.
Mm-hmm.
During this exorcism, Mimi went out without a noise, but Zozo was more persistent and broke a stained glass window of the church by escaping through the rooftops. Now, this is all written down in, yes, the Dictionary Infernal, and it's a reference to Zozo 80 years before we find that I start this blog documenting people's experiences based on the early experiences that I had, which caused several nervous breakdowns, being hospitalized.
Yeah.
I was seeing, I was hallucinating. And, that can be a difficult thing for a man of my intelligence to accept,
Yeah.
The sexual perversion and attraction to females back in those early days when I would have these sessions really bothered me. And that's not an uncommon thing to happen going back 14 years when this phenomenon became exposed because of my experiences, and because when I got to tell you, Bryan, when I realized that people were having experiences with this particular named entity, I'll never forget the chills that I had. It's like, man, I am not crazy, but now I've got something I'm going to have to try to explain to myself.
Yeah.
And for me to do that, I'm going to have to go public with this.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have to search out people, and I'm going to have to document this evidence, and I'm going to have to, what I'm going to do? I'm going to put it in a blog, and I started that blog in 2009, where I started, talking about my experiences and comparing them with those experiences that I found online, that I have still posted. These early experiences, one of them was called Zozo the Reptoid.
The
This
Reptoid.
is a guy in the 90s. The Reptoid.
Reptoid.
Oh, like
This
a reptilian.
was a guy
Oh.
in the 90s that was showing up on various paranormal message boards. And this was before Ghost Hunters. This was before you had the paranormal explosion on media.
Right.
Well, this guy was going on paranormal forums, and he was saying, look, I've been on Ouija boards for years. I've contacted this thing called Zozo. It appeared to me, it looked like a grasshopper. Its legs were huge. It had huge muscles. It had scales. It resembled a huge grasshopper. But it appeared before me and told me all these things. And all you got to do is Google Zozo the Reptoid, and it's on it's everywhere now, because I've talked about this as one of my early encounters with the internet side of Zozo.
Mm-hmm.
This was one of the first ones that I read about when I had access to the internet, in the mid '90s. But again, when I found out that other people were having experiences with this thing, I started to document them, and I started to write about them. And I was very quickly contacted by a film company from Hollywood that had read my original post on the TrueGhostTales.com website, where I described in the latter part of 2008, I went ahead and I said, look, I'm going to go public. And I was laughed out of so many paranormal chat rooms at the time. People thought I was nuts. And they still do, by the way. But it was happening, and I was documenting it, and I was really trying to look into this phenomenon. Well, people started coming out of the woodwork, sending me emails saying, "Oh my God, all these, this has happened to me. Here's what happened there." Well, I put site trackers, and the coolest site tracker I had at the time, and I didn't really know what I was doing, but I was able to put a site tracker on this site, and anybody that landed on my site, it would show up as a red dot on this, spinning globe.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like every day, it was from all over the world, people were, emailing me and trying to get in touch with me. And so I got really paranoid about things because, I didn't really want to be in the limelight, but I wanted to document this phenomenon,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so if I would have thought back then, now this was in the 90s, leading up to when I finally went public in 2008 with this old school blog. I'd never created a blog before, but I was like, you know what? I'm gonna put this information out there, and I'm gonna see what happens because, man, I know this is some real shit.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, again, if you go to unsolvedmysteries.com and you type in Zozo, you'll see all these different people. And one of the earliest ones that I found also, I'm a researcher at heart, and I've done a lot of research, perhaps more than anyone else in the world, on this phenomenon. And to some that might be pretty stupid, but to me it's pretty important because I've bridged a lot of connections with these early mentionings of Zozo throughout literary sources, whether it be a grimoire, such as what we find in the Dictionary Infernal, or if we go back even further, if we go back maybe 1,000 years and we look at an instance where a remarkable demonic reference to Zozo is found in a sermon by the Franciscan Saint Bernardino of Siena, who lived from the years 1380 to 1444. Now, Saint Bernardino was known as the Apostle of Italy, and this guy was a saint.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It was his travels. His travels. He was known for delivering very stern sermons, and he once told a whole crowd that he would show them devils, and then shocked everyone by telling them to look at each other, for they were doing the work of Satan. And so, in one of these early Saint Bernardino's sermons, he lashed out against gambling, which was considered a vice by the church. And in this sermon, he describes what he calls the Mass of Zozo. And this was back in, I had to translate this from Latin. And Rosemary Ellen Guiley helped me translate a lot of these documents from early Latin to English.
Right.
Because back in that time they were speaking Latin still, And so this Mass of Zozo was known as the Commune Omnium Daemonum, which translated to English means common to all the demons. That this Mass of Zozo is to be like a Sunday Mass of the Christians and reserved for the impious majesty himself. He's talking like Satan is running the whole gambling industry, and in this sermon, but again, here's the controversial thing. It's one thing in the 1800s to discover, that Zozo was mentioned as an actual demon that was involved in a possession case, but you go back to 1400, the 15th century, and then we have a saint that is talking about the Mass of Zozo, and then we even go back to the 7th century. And if it wasn't for a Tibetan exchange student, I would have never found out about this. But Zozo is mentioned in an early Tibetan prophecy that is, and the weirdest thing about this, and this is like my weirdest finding of all, it's the oldest and the weirdest, in that when you read this prophecy from pre-Zen Tibet, it reads like it's ripped out of today's headlines, where it talks about there was a prisoner that was released from the ninth citadel of copper in this Tibetan prophecy, that King Yarling reluctantly released a human being from captivity. This human being all the demons of the world would band together to support this human being. And what was this human being's name? Zozo, Lord of all demons. I had to translate that finding from French, and it was written by a professor of Asian studies that was perhaps the most knowledgeable of pre-Zen Tibetan demonology of anybody that's ever lived. Mm-hmm. And he was able to find this prophecy that mentioned a human being that would become known as Zozo, and that this would signify that the human, in this prophecy, it talks about how we misunderstand time. That it's not necessarily this linear succession of events as we perceive it. Okay, but so it's just a really fascinating mention of this particular entity, and it doesn't stop there. I've found dozens of references in literature in the last several thousand years that all point to this particular word or sigil, whatever it may be. The only thing that connects them is it's very dark and very evil, and then it's very commonly mentioned as demonic. And so, you of all people, Bryan, you understand when you start mentioning the demonic, you start getting into some very controversial territory.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Our preconceived notions of such a label, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if we call a demon a demon, then we're putting a label on that particular energy or whatever it may be. And so there's so many demonologists out there, and that's one thing that I want to say is I've never really considered myself a demonologist. I was jokingly referred to as a Zozoologist 10 years ago. That kind of caught on, you know. And
well, it kind of fits. Yep.
And so, and here's the thing. There's been thousands and thousands of people that have communicated with something that identifies itself with this particular Zo or Zozo. And so it's been kind of my responsibility. I got to be honest, it doesn't go without some guilt, because of certain critics Christian ones that have labeled me, a demonic worshiper or someone who's, dug a little too deep and is going to have to now deal with the consequences. And I openly admit some of that may be true. I do carry some guilt.
Yeah.
But I never invented this phenomenon. I never made it anything up.
Right.
I simply documented what I went through and what other people have gone through and started to try to research it. And then we, here we are today. Things, thankfully, have slowed down. I got to tell you guys, it was overwhelming trying to respond to all the people.
Yeah, I'm sure.
That emailed me. I mean, in my archives, guys, I hope to be able to make it public, maybe somehow get a computer program or be able to put an imprint of all the emails, all the people from all over the world that have contacted me, all the cases that I've had to, keep up with it. Some involving tragedies, some involving happy endings. It's been a trip. It really has. But it hurts when people think that I've made it up or that I to do this for monetary gain, or there's not a lot of money in the paranormal, guys.
No, I can testify to
honey.
that. I can testify to that. You don't go into this business to get rich. There are anomalies, of course. If you get the right kind of hit show, and it does really well, and it just becomes sort of an icon of a network, then there could be money in production, but there's definitely no money in paranormal investigating on its own, or even just being an expert in some area involving the paranormal. So I can definitely testify to that, but I'll tell you, Darren, I do make sure that before every episode we put out notifications on social media, letting people know what the subject matter is for tonight, reminding people to watch the show on YouTube or listen to it on Blog Talk or Spreaker or wherever they prefer to listen to podcasts. And usually when I put out a tweet or a post, it's typically a very positive response. Can't wait for tonight's show. Really looking forward to this topic, that kind of thing. But on Facebook for this one, we've got a guy who responded, not sure why so many people are drawn to demons. All they want to do is possess and kill you, and as many people as they can. They hate people, yet so many summon and invite them into their lives. Foolishness. So I don't think, knowing you the way that I do, I don't think that, hopefully he's not talking about you, because I know that you agree with most of that.
Right. You didn't ask for this. Yeah. Definitely did not ask for this.
I saw that post.
Yeah.
I saw that post earlier.
Yeah.
I didn't really know. I was going to respond, but I was like, I bet that comes up, and the guy's right. With his, perception. Everybody lives their own paradigm, their own everything. Everybody's reality is different. Everybody's faith is different. But the guy's right. Too many people concentrate on the demonic, and I think the angelic is something that's not it's just as cool and not nearly as talked about.
Not
and
at
I've
all.
said that for years.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But you know, it seems, and I want to talk about something that I think is important with this whole Ouija thing, getting, you know, spurning a little bit away from the Zozo phenomenon. You know, the Ouija board got a really bad rap because of this film, The Exorcist.
Yeah.
And there's so many people, especially a lot of if you've noticed, there's been a tendency towards, in the last decade especially, I've noticed, as one that, you know, takes a look at all this, is that the acceptance of the Ouija board has become, it's never been more popular than it has been in the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
5 years ago, it was the top 3 gifts at Christmas. You know, since 1891, it's estimated that there's probably been something along the lines of 16 million fold boards printed and out in circulation. That's not to mention the thousands or millions of homemade devices that have been made that I myself have dwelled into.
Oh yeah,
for
I've seen them made out of
purposes
cardboard.
research.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you know, there's one thing that, you know, you can go spend $1,000 on a Ouija board. It might be haunted, it might be on eBay, it might be all hyped out. But you know what? I can take a piece of paper, and I can draw an alphabet on it, and I can get just as good a result as you can on that $1,000 Ouija board.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
And so there's a big misconception between the states and those that be that want to talk about which side of the fence do you sit on when it involves Ouija boards. Are we talking to ourselves, like science suggests, like the recent scientific
Ideomotor.
Ideomotor effect?
Yeah.
But they've been deeper, you know. And you know, in 2015, I was invited to speak at the first annual Ouija Con, and it was a 125th anniversary celebration of the Ouija board. Okay, and there was a lot of people showed up in Baltimore, Maryland, you know, and it was really strange. At the same time that we were there was when those race riots broke out in Baltimore.
Right.
And we were quarantined inside this hotel for this paranormal conference, and there was some weird shit that happened there.
Mm-hmm.
For the first time, they had the museum of the Ouija. There was over 150 boards that are on display in a particular location in this hotel. And I was one of the few people that was able to go in there by myself and record a little session, you know, walking by all these vintage boards. You know, I captured a very strange growl when I walked up to one certain board at that conference. But the weird thing about that whole thing was, you know, I was invited by Robert Murch, who at the time was the chairman of the board, literally,
Mm-hmm.
For the Talking Board Historical Society. And at that time, they started having these Ouija films that I predicted in 2011. I predicted, because of the Zozo phenomenon, that there would be a succession of Hollywood films based on the board, and I was correct.
Mm-hmm.
Robert Goldman, the head honcho at Warner Brothers, you know, he, on one hand, he produces, you know, all these toy boards, and then on the other hand, when he was interviewed, and back, you know, when Ouija 1 was getting ready, was changing producers left and right and all this stuff. But on one hand, he's coming out with these boards as the CEO, speaking for Hasbro, saying it's just a game. And then here he is, this, you know, also filming horror films with jump scares like The Ring and like other, you know, other horror films based on the Ouija board. I find that to be a little kind of a dichotomy of that's kind of dirty pool, I thought, because I really stand by my thought process when it comes to the marketing of these Ouija boards from you know, Hasbro. They've come out with the pink and the pastel pinks, and you know, the all these different movies come out with Supernatural. And interestingly enough, when the Supernatural board came out, A bunch of people bought those boards, and then if you go to Google and you Google Supernatural board and you look at all the comments that have gone throughout the years, you know, the strange thing about that one, it was missing the letter Z, guys.
Oh, really?
This was a board that was manufactured by Hasbro for the series The Supernatural.
Oh, yeah.
And this board was totally missing the letter Z, and somebody contacted me. I think it was 2014 or...
Yeah, I remember that.
No, it was after that. It was like 2016. Somebody contacted me saying, Darren, what do you think about this? And so I took it upon myself to contact whatever side company that was made to develop that. And I was given an email that said that it was a marketing advertising mistake. And I'm like, are you kidding me?
I find that hard to believe.
Yeah, that would be.
I really am an artist, and I've done commercial art for years.
Yeah.
If I'm going to design a Ouija board, am I going to leave off the letter Z unless it's on purpose? You know?
Yeah.
I kind of found their whole answer to that to be a little bit on the misconstrued side of town.
Yeah.
But
I believe the kids
you know
call
what?
that stuff.
You know, whatever works. You know, and you know what? To think that this Zozo phenomenon has evolved, you know, and continues to evolve. You know, guys, they made at Not Scary Farm in California. They made a couple of years ago. They made a virtual reality Zozo demon attraction to the masses out in California.
Oh my goodness.
And there was video footage of it, and there's a great big board, everybody sitting around, and then up through the center comes this demon, right?
Yeah.
You know, and guys, you know, going back to the 80s when I first found and began having Ouija sessions, you know, and not wanting to talk to this thing because it would often, we would try to use it on the regular side, with, you know, the William Fold side.
Yeah.
Because there was something about that other side that we just sensed that you didn't want to mess with.
Yeah.
But the planchet would come off the board, and then it would scoot the board off the table, and it would land on the Zozo side. And so we'd bring it back up. It was like it was really wanting us to, you know, and I'm thinking to myself back then, well, you know what, Zeppelin or Jimmy Page has been known to have been involved in some pretty dark stuff, you know. And so I can see where people connect those two, but more importantly, we talked about the last show we did, Bryan, we talked about this being kind of a collective paradigm.
Like an egregore.
Are these the entities, you know, are these names, you know, it's not just Zozo, it's Zaza.
Yeah.
It's these Z entities. And notice the influx of these in the last decade and people's experiences that they submit to all these different paradigms. I do a lot of research on people's regular experiences and the irregular ones, you know. Not all Ouija experiences are bad.
Yeah,
Bryan, we did it, guys. We did it right there. You know, one night we did it.
We live streamed it.
We got on a board.
Yeah, we live streamed
At
that.
that bar.
We did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was nothing negative about that one.
Darren, I put up on the YouTube screen for those watching on YouTube. I don't know if you've ever seen this picture or not, Darren, but it's also from the Infernal Dictionary. It's the Ultimate Edition, translated in English, that's available on Amazon. And at the back of the second volume, it has a lot of full-page, full-color pictures of some primary demons that are referenced in that set. And Zozo's one of them. And I put a picture of that particular one up on the screen right now, and it's an interesting representation. It's a kind of a it's a female. It's represented as a female, large hips, breasts. It looks like it's mixing something in a chalice or a cup of some kind, but it has long hair, again, in a very effeminate way, but the face is almost identical to what I would say is very similar to the way the alien is represented in Sigourney
from Alien,
Weaver's
yeah.
Alien. So, my question to you before we take our top of the hour break here, do you think it's possible that this thing might be of extraterrestrial origin, given the reptilian reference that you mentioned earlier?
Really cool question, because I've often, even when Rosemary Ellen Guiley was still alive, we were talking about that connection, and that being one of the first ones available online with that Zozo reptoid, where he described the whole reptilian concept and what his encounter was all about. And so there is an alien aspect to all of this, whether it be from projection, whether it be from an entropy of sorts, when it comes to the fine line between what actually happens and then when humans get involved, such as maybe what happened with the Slender Man and maybe with the facets of the Mothman prophecy.
Yeah.
These are all based on experiences, but when the Slender Man was basically made up, but it was such a popular story, it began to take a life of its own. It began to take on what's known as an egregorial type of conflict, if you will.
Yeah.
Right.
And so this whole power of projection, I think, is very striking when it comes to this particular phenomenon. And it goes back to Crowley. He drew pictures of a demon that he came across.
It looked like an alien.
Working.
It looked like a gray, yeah.
It looked just like an alien.
Yeah.
Like a gray, they call it. Yes.
Yeah.
And if we look back into the early encounters of Zozo itself as a word, we find in 1954, an early UFOologist by the name of George Williamson wrote a book called The Saucer Speak, in which him and his wife and another couple sat out on a board to communicate with aliens, because they had this guy was very controversial. He was on the FBI watch list. He had gone to college and studied indigenous, tribal, shamanistic beliefs and all that type of culture, and he developed his own way and his own. He was convinced that there was aliens, and he was part of that whole early UFO experiences. And he wrote about talking to aliens through Ouija boards, and one of these aliens was named Zoe. It claimed it was from the planet Neptune, and so
a neighbor.
Term or
relatively close to us, right? Same star system.
And this character that he documented in this book named Zoe, it had a chilling and foreboding message for humans. That said that there was other aliens out there whose primary objective would be to destroy humans, not unlike a demonic sense. And so that kind of tied early ufology to the demonic realm, getting back to what I was talking about with the whole bad rap with the Ouija board in the 70s because of the film The Exorcist. If you go back in time, and you go back to 1819, when the first manufactured or trademark boards were coming out, there existed a paranormal circle of people that would communicate with spirits on planchets and other devices, sundials, and various dials that you could talk to the other side. And I think that's people don't really realize that. But yes, the board came out in 1891, but during that whole spiritual movement, during that time that led up to the Ouija board's development and trademark and issued and acceptance and as a parlor device or whatever, people were talking to invisible entities with planchette devices. And there's a lot of books, if you start digging, there's a lot of books that describe conversations with evil characters, evil
Darren,
entities that would show up.
Let me hold your thought on that. We're going to take our break now that we're a little bit past the top of the hour. Don't lose your thought. I want you to continue right where you're leaving off when we come back. We're speaking with Darren Evans right now about the Zozo phenomena, and you can call into the show at 561-453-0138. Ask us a question, and we'll be right back after this.
I'm falling down from the sky and from the ground. Up above, just like below, and I don't know where I should go. 'Cause I'm stuck in limbo. I'm out of love, but I guess I deserved it. Trying to hide, pass you by. I'm getting dying, so afraid. I'm like this air, no one can reach me. Lost in a dream, lost in between. Let's keep on flying, let's keep on breathing. I'm falling up, I'm falling down from the sky.
Welcome back, everyone, to Vestiges After Dark. We're getting ready for the second half of the show, and we would love to hear from you. Now's the time to call in, 516-453-0138. That's 516-453-0138. Do you have a question about Zozo, a comment, perhaps a personal story? We'd like to hear it. Give us a call. If not, there's also the chat room currently open on YouTube, on the YouTube channel. And you can ask your questions in there. Sister Mary Joan will monitor, and she will pull good ones from the chat if she sees them. So if you got one, ask away. Getting ready for the second half here in just a moment. Don't go away. Well, I had to interrupt you before the break there, Darren, but I hope you remembered where you left off. So go ahead and continue where you were at.
Well, Bryan, we're talking about how the film The Exorcist kind of put a bad rap on the Ouija board.
Yeah, right.
Before The Exorcist, it was kind of, advertised, and then to a lot of people, it was just simply a game, a parlor device. And I've often disagreed with that analogy, and based on my personal experiences. Of course, me being who I am, I've been dealt whatever card that I've had to study. I've had to be involved or consult or actually work or be involved in cases that involve this phenomenon. But I think it's important, and I want you to look this up if you can, guys. If you can look up it's one of my favorite poems, and the author's unknown. But this was sent to me years ago when I was looking for answers with this whole phenomenon. I haven't really shared this with anybody, but I thought cooler time we could maybe share this. It's called The Loom of Time. And if you guys have internet, you can look that up real quick. The Loom of Time. Okay. And it's a poem. And this was sent to me from an exorcist.
Oh, really?
From Italy.
Oh, interesting.
And yes. And I want to share it with you. And it's always been, and I hope that the reason I bring this up, Bryan, is because it's something I haven't brought up with you, but I always kind of wanted your outlook on this poem.
Okay.
And if you have it pulled up, let me read it to you. It's pretty short.
Okay. No, go ahead.
But here's what it is. Man's life is laid in the loom of time to a pattern he does not see, while the weavers work and the shuttles fly till the dawn of eternity. Some shuttles are filled with silver thread, and some with threads of gold, while others hold the darker hues, are all that they may hold. The weaver watches with skillful eye each shuttle fly to and fro, and sees the pattern so deftly wrought as the loom moves shore and flow. God surely planned the pattern. Each thread, the dark and fair, is chosen by his master skill and placed in the web with care. He only knows its beauty and guides the shuttles which hold the thread so unattractive, as well as the threads of gold. Not till each loom is silent and the shuttle ceases to fly shall God reveal the pattern and explain the reason why the dark threads were as needful as the weaver's skillful hand, as the threads of gold and silver for the pattern which he planned.
Mm.
Now, that was sent to me years ago. And it's making more sense the older I get, and the more I start to look at this whole phenomenon. You know, it's like, why does it exist? Why do these things exist that cause humans such turmoil? When we look at spirit communication, Bryan,
Mm-hmm.
what do we have?
Yeah.
We have our prayers, our relationship that we have with whatever power that we believe in, with prayer, or we use automatic writing, we use pendulums, we use Ouija boards, we use whatever that we think that we have to use. And for Zozo to be mentioned in so many different cultures that span thousands of years before the modern invention of the board, what are your thoughts, Bryan, as to what's really going on? Why is this word mentioned repeatedly up until the invention of the modern spirit board, from which it begins to 125 years goes by, and then suddenly you have this entity that's basically become the Dark Lord of the spirit world?
Yeah.
Bryan, what the hell's going on, man?
I mean, from my perspective, what I see in it is that there are certain manifestations, at least in my work, of what I would call ancient evil. And typically what we're dealing with in paranormal investigation, when it does tend to go towards the dark side of things, it's more of a contemporary evil, usually a manifestation of something that is happening new to the circumstances of the environment in which it finds itself. But when we're dealing with something like Zozo, it takes on a different characteristic, because I think it is a manifestation of something so incredibly ancient, getting back into some of the root aspects of human nature. And that poem, you know, I think reflects some of that, in the sense that evil does function within the framework of our current existence in order to create differentiation, and thus contrast. Like, think of it, this perhaps oversimplifies it, but think of it in terms of photography. You know, if you're using Photoshop and you play around with the contrast bar, you know, you can put the contrast all the way over to the light side of the contrast, and it's going to wash out the entire picture, and, you know, all you're going to see is white. And if you move that contrast bar all the way over to the dark side of the contrast to darken it up, if you go all the way to the end, it just makes the entire picture go black. It's only with the careful combination of the two do we get the clarity of the picture. And so I think what the purpose that evil serves, or I would say evil doesn't necessarily serve a purpose as much as reabsorption does. I think evil is a bastardization of reabsorption, because I think there's two fundamental principles metaphysically operational within the cosmos at any given time. That is creation, the creative faculty, what I call the creative faculty, and then reabsorption, which is the reabsorption faculty. We see these cycles all throughout. You know, yin and yang is another way of representing that. Binary, if you're a computer guy or a science guy, you know, yin and binary code, ones and zeros, shows that how reality can be built upon those very basic integers. You know, so you're looking at things in the sense that there is a certain polarity to existence. And the reabsorption side, the side that we would equate to destruction, which is sometimes necessary. You know, you can't have creation without having some framework for which to build. And typically the energy of creation comes from that which is originally or previously reabsorbed. I honestly think that is the fundamental principle of how the universe even gets here. The Big Bang, you know, people are always speculating what happened before the Big Bang. Well, I mean, I think it's all the energy of the previous universe. and that causes that to happen. You know, when a universe gets to a point where it can no longer expand, when it has no energy left in which to produce anything, then it just completely, contracts, and I guess they call it the Big Crunch. And then it creates the seed to create an entirely new universe, and we could even refer to that as the breath of God. You can't have an inhale without an exhale. You have to get rid of the old air in order to bring new air in. That means that something has to die in order for life to exist. So I think where evil comes into that equation is it's a bastardized variant of the destructive or reabsorption principles in this universe. And that is when it is behaviorally applied. And the reason that this is a problem, if we want to get very theological here, the reason it's a problem is that human beings being made, at least from a Judeo-Christian standpoint, in the image of God, which does not mean he looks like us, like God looks like a human being. That's not what this means. Being made in the image of God means we are like him. And that means that we too possess creative ability, the ability to create things, and we see this in our behavior. We art, music,
on a collective level.
Yes, absolutely. On a collective level, we build things. What do? We create technology, and we constantly explore. We are creators by nature, just like God. But it's a problem when we align ourselves to the destructive principle, because that's not part of our nature. That's the fallen nature that Adam and Eve and the book of Genesis and the story of creation.
But Bryan,
yes,
how important are names when it comes to this demonic realm?
Oh yeah, yes. The personification. Well, it's actually what we're talking about with a name from an occult standpoint is you are capturing the power of that very thing. When you name a thing, you put energy into it.
To summon by means of some magical practice. Mm-hmm. In ancient times, you're talking about ancient evil as opposed to contemporary evil, and I find that most fascinating when it comes to the Zozo phenomenon, especially.
Yeah.
The power of names to summon evil is well known in magical practices since ancient times.
Yeah.
So a name is basically a vibration of energy. In magical invocations, evocations, names and words of power are vibrated, so to speak, and spoken with such great force and authority that the vibration of the sound is felt through the entire body and through those experiencing that summoning. And this is done with the understanding of whatever name or word that you're using has an intense projection of energy, and that's where we come to what's going on with this whole Zozo thing. Is it what Joseph Sonntag wrote about the power of Zo by itself? Is it a magnification of that? Joseph Sonntag wrote an article about the etymology of the word Zo, and he believed that it come from ancient voodoo and meant a spiritual leader. We have the Zo people of Burma. We have the Zo shamans in Africa that in a recent scientific periodical was written about these Zozo shamans helped spread Ebola because of their bizarre scarification and bloodletting rituals.
Yeah.
What is it about this word, and do words are we dealing with old magic, old school magic, whether it be good or evil? Is there a power in this letter Z that so many of these Ouija characters seem to identify with? We're getting into areas of demonology that have never really been opened, but because of the modern, we have to look at these names. We have to look. I've been criticized by someone who writes a dictionary of demonology right now, who claims that the whole Zozo phenomena is just a manifestation of the board going back and forth successively.
Yeah, and I've seen that.
I strongly believe that is incorrect.
Yeah.
I'll admit.
Well, you
that
only have to
this-
look at your research to realize that.
But if that were true, if the going, which I nicknamed it the rainbow effect, from going from Z to O.
Yeah.
Why, if they say that that's just the board manifesting itself, why don't we hear about that in some of these earlier writings? About Ouija, which leads me to the book written in 1967 called Patterns of Prophecy by Alan Vaughan. This guy was experimenting. He was a paranormal researcher in 1967, experimenting with Ouija boards, when suddenly an entity that only identified itself as the letter Z entered his mind and possessed him. And he writes all about it in this book, Patterns of Prophecy by Alan Vaughan in 1967. And so we keep seeing this term or this sigil or this magical. If you look at the letter Z, it's been eliminated from early Latin. It's been eliminated from various languages for reasons going to the dark side.
Mm-hmm.
In early Latin, the letter Z was eliminated from its language for the mere pronunciation of the letter Z caused the face to contort and what they call the rictus of death, or the digging up of a fresh, body from the grave.
Yeah.
And so it was later reintroduced. But if we look at history and the mentionings of this letter Z and how it's often affiliated with the demonic, it's just crazy the connections that can be, linked between this letter Z by itself.
Well, speaking of names,
names,
speaking of names, if I may interrupt you with that thought, back again in that infernal dictionary, we have that case with Mene and Crapulae. Have those names come up with an association with Zozo in other places in any research you've done, or is that really the only time we see those three grouped together?
Zozo is mentioned in ancient Tibetan demonology as a great power. All cultures have used magical rituals involving names that embody a person or a vehicle of that, a power essence involving luck, destiny, fate. I mean, you've got Babylonia, Assyria, Egypt. They all held great importance for the power of names for invoking and commanding spirits, and that certain amulets had certain sacred names that were used to ward off these demonic forces. And so, when you start talking old school, well, your interpretation, Bryan, you mentioned old school. When 2010 on my first radio show, when I was talking about the Zozo phenomenon for the first time with Dave Schrader,
mm-hmm.
he mentioned that John Zappis had run across the name Zozo in several of his early encounters, as one of the busiest field demonologists in the country. And when John Zappis went forward on the next week, he wasn't even supposed to be on the show. But somebody from Darkness Radio had also had a Zozo encounter. They wanted to talk about it, and they called John Zappis, who was known at the time to be one of the most well-researched persons in today's modern demonology in the field. And so we're getting to where, in a new dictionary of demons, Zozo isn't listed, and they don't believe that Zozo's a demon simply because it doesn't have it's not listed in the old school names, Tibetan of the Dead, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the 72, the all these different demonic lists. Zozo's not mentioned.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we have again a dichotomy between, do we, as modern researchers, do we pay attention to the old names, or do we pay attention to the names that come forward in today's manifestations and spirit encounters and spirit engagements, seances, Ouija board encounters? We have to pay attention to what's going on in both worlds.
Right. No, I agree,
We
and I
can't
mean
dismiss
honestly,
it
I've
because
seen
it sounds like
in
Bozo the
our
clown.
work when we've been doing exorcisms, and as I've mentioned so many times before, part of the rite or the solemn rite of exorcism, part of it is the early part is to get the demon's name, because that's when we can start to gain the upper hand and control over this thing. And I have had entities call out their name and being in things that are not going to be found in ancient grimoires, but things like words like lust. I've had pedophilia once. I mentioned that, I think, a couple episodes ago. Demons referring to themselves as certain actions of evil. And that's, I think, particularly significant. And if that's how it identifies itself, then that's how we go about removing it from this person's life. And it's successfully done so. I mean, we've never had a problem doing it that way. So, obviously.
Okay, so if we look at the Zozo phenomenon in particular.
Yeah.
If we look at it as a sigil, right?
Right.
Sigils are symbols that express occult forces, I guess, that are contained in a set of ideas, sacred names, the numerical essences of angels, intelligences, spirits, planets. The term sigil comes from the Latin sigillum, which means seal. And it's not the sigil that itself calls forth the spirits, but it's when that they are thought through with practitioners that it achieves a desired state of mind that can create a manifestation. And so, obviously, throughout mankind, we've been using these names and rituals and sigils. Perhaps Zozo, or the word Zo, is not a word, but a symbol of types that allows perhaps the projection of the collective demonic, such as we might see. We've talked about this before, just briefly, about archetypes within the human mind that Freud describes, such as the shadow,
yes,
which can be the worst thoughts that you could ever come up with, your worst nightmare, your worst anything is projected through that archetype of our own psyche. And so how much of this whole lore that's become of the Zozo phenomena can be traced back to a collective archetype? I think it's connected.
I do too. I think all of it is, actually. Honestly, I would say that most of these things are archetypally driven. And we talked about that last week, actually, with Dr. Grosso. And if you didn't listen to that episode, Darren, I'd recommend you do, because I think you'd find it fascinating and helpful in what we're talking about here tonight. But yeah, I do think that there is absolutely, ultimately, some manifestation out of wherever that collectively comes from, these archetypes like the shadow and the trickster. Typically, when we're dealing with demons, it's a combination of those two Jungian archetypes that are producing the effect that we would classify as a demonic response, whether it be oppression, obsession, or possession. But overall, we've also seen in most cases, I would say primarily when there is a genuine paranormal disturbance going on that we feel has a demonic slant to it, or if a person is reporting that there's some kind of demonic possession or obsession going on, or what we have noticed is that a lot of times, most of the time, these are manifestations out of their own traumas, and that they become sentient. These traumas that they have been afflicted with somewhere in their life become sentient creatures that harass and forever torment their victims. It's fascinating, but there
We've
seems
seen that more often than not.
we do, and it's an externalization of this. Like I mentioned to Dr. Grosso last week. In standard psychology, when a person, particularly a young child, suffers a severe trauma, typically repression is the way that is dealt with. The psyche just locks it up, and they kind of forget about it, but subconsciously it surfaces at different parts of their life, usually when they start growing up. and then they have all these anxieties and depressions that can result all the way to suicidal ideation down the road, because they have this repressed memory of a trauma that is tormenting them subconsciously on the inside. That's the normal route. But what psychology doesn't talk about is this other possibility of externalizing it. So repression internalizes it, buries it deep within oneself. No one sees it, not even the person, but it just surfaces every now and then, because you really can't repress things like that forever. But others seem to just push it out. They just push it out of themselves in a type of egregore or projection, like a tulpa or a thought form, and that becomes a sentient creature in every occult sense. I mean, that's how powerful we are as human beings, I think. And I don't know if Zozo's kind of
whether you have the the bias of recognition or not. It still seems to affect one, which would really give me, if I was an exorcist, a headache. You know what I mean, Bryan?
Yes.
When you're dealing with an ancient force, that may or may not have been recognized. I mean, I know you've probably come across this in your travels. And I've found this very interesting as I've interviewed several other exorcists, in other cases that didn't involve this phenomenon, but still interviewed them in their proceedings and their methodologies. I've found it very interesting how what works for one may or may not work for another. But when you look at all the different exorcists, like I know Everett Cox, and he's known as the Oklahoma exorcist. Mm-hmm. And he's a non-denominational exorcist, and he claims to drive out devils, bro. And I believe him. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to get someone with your background. How does that work? I mean, does our belief systematically affect the manifestation?
Yeah, I think it does. And I think it's certainly not like something that is exclusive to Catholicism. Certainly that wouldn't be something that is limited to just one model. And there are people that are just naturally inclined to being good at doing this. Why, I couldn't tell you exactly. I mean, the church has an explanation for it that just says it's a grace of the Holy Spirit that some people possess. And maybe that is exactly what it is. But outside of, the religious definitions, some people are good at it. Some people are not. Most people wouldn't know where to begin, but some people seem to have a natural proclivity for this. That would be where I fall into the category.
Bryan, how important in your exorcism, in your practice, how important is names when it comes to your decision making? When it becomes when it comes time for you and Sister Mary to strap up, how important is those names, and do they surface during the exorcism?
Oh yeah, always. When we do when we use the solemn rite, and that part where there is an actual invocation, where some might even say it's an incantation the way that it's written, but it's a demand to the demon in the name of Jesus Christ to reveal itself. And that is early on. That's in the beginning parts of the rite, because that is where the foundation is to getting control over the circumstances. Prior to getting that name, you're just going in circles for that period of time, and there's a lot of resistance. Typically, they do not want you to have it, but they become compelled.
No, once you get the name, you know what you're dealing with. You know where to go with it.
Yes, yeah. So yes, I would say it's essential. It's 100% important. It's necessary to the successful conclusion of the rite. Absolutely.
Okay, and so if we get back to the prototypical example of a demonic collective, maybe it could be found in the Bible. The Gospels of Mark, Luke, and Matthew tell how Jesus exorcised a possessed man, the Gerasene, soon after delivering the Sermon on the Mount. For he, Jesus, had been saying to him, "The spirit, come out of the man, you unclean spirit." He was asking him, "What is your name?" And he said to him, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Yeah. Is Zozo like Legion?
I think so.
One of the many entities in a collective of whom are band together to behave and attack in certain ways.
Go ahead, sister.
No, I agree. I do believe that's exactly what it is.
I think this is what we've noticed, and some of it, again, coming back to names, has revealed this little mystery about it. And this is what I have observed directly in my work. And I think that it's been able to allow me to draw this very educated opinion or conclusion on where I feel it goes, because this is something that bothered me. The church will always say, in the common notion, Darren, of exorcism is that you're pulling the demon out of a person and sending them back to hell. But the overwhelming opinion is that the demon still lives on, just goes back to hell, which means that at some point it could just get back out again, I guess, and go and affect someone else. And that's always been sort of this, I guess, the typical understanding of how it works. But that's not how I've seen it work. In the work that I do, they are destroyed. They are eliminated. They are completely eradicated by the rites of exorcism. There is no, I guess you could say that's sending to hell, because actually, theologically, hell is eradication. So, there's really not a theological conflict, but people create these ideas where hell's a location, so they think that that's where the demon goes. It's not a location. It's a process of eradication. But outside of that, what I have noticed is, we will have a client, and you'll be doing the rite of exorcism, and then you get to that point, what's your name, demon? And it will say out Lucifer or Beelzebub or something like that, okay? And yet, you'll complete the rite of exorcism, you remove that from the person goes on to live a normal, healthy life after that, no disturbances after that, and then a couple months down the road, you're doing another case, you ask which demon it is, and it'll say Lucifer again, or it'll say Beelzebub
and
again.
It's like, hello.
And it's like,
Yeah.
what? So what happened? Did you send them to hell? They came back and affected someone else? That's not what's going on. These are family names. Okay, Beelzebub, Lucifer,
the same family.
Yes, these are family names, and they're not really families in the sense that human beings have families. What they are is collective resonances, energetically,
Roots.
of the same basic principles, and they are fractured countless times into all these different possibilities, and those different fractures can infect people. So you could literally be working 3 cases, and all 3 of them are possessed by Lucifer. But it's not an individual. It's a collective, and that's one aspect of that collective entity that makes up what we would call Lucifer. But it's multiple sentiences. And so I think Zozo's that. I think they're all that. I think all demons fall into that. I think angels are that too. I think what we call the choirs of angels, the seraphim, the cherubim, the powers, principalities, all these things, these are names that are given to their collective operations, because each of these choirs of angels has a different role or function within the cosmic operations of the universe and creation. And demons don't have choirs. They call them orders of demons. But those, again, are also categories that sort of collectively lump them into one energetic operation that serves that particular malignancy.
To us paranormal educated people,
yeah,
we can't really say that Zozo is one specific demon. I think that we could all agree that it's probably not.
No,
Otherwise,
I think
why would
it's
it
the
come
name
forth
of a
and
group of
identify
demons.
with that name? It's a name it's perhaps a
group.
sigil that allows a manifestation of whatever type of energy that allows. I don't know.
I think it's
That seems to be the most.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it.
Otherwise, then you have to look at how is it able to be in 2 places at once. Then we start getting into, can that really happen? We can't prove this stuff. We go into how science explains the communication that one can go through on the board. But my thoughts on the whole ideomotor effect is how, if you have multiple people place their hands on a planchette, the ideomotor effect doesn't explain how it's able to magically and instantaneously resolve all thought into a communication and that often uses abbreviations and often misspells words that we would not misspell.
Right.
So there's a lot of holes in the, I was able to actually be one of the first to interview scientific researchers that were crowdfunding for the first time to try to dig into what actually happens when we use boards, involving the subconscious. And I do admit that there is an exchange of a subconscious realm when we do the board. That's never been an argument with me. But regardless of which side you sit on, are we talking to an internal agency or an external being? It does not change, number one, the paranormality of the exchange itself.
Right.
We don't want to shoot the messenger. Information can come in that could not have possibly come in by any other. When it starts revealing information unknown to the participants, and that goes to the study at UBC when they would blindfold participants and ask them questions, and before they put the blindfold on, it showed another person on the other side using the board with them. Well, when they blindfolded them, the other person would lift their fingers from the board. The person still thought that they were communicating with someone else on the planet.
Yeah.
And
Right.
they were able to answer questions of a 16 percentile greater accuracy than if those same questions were asked off the board.
Hmm.
And so that was the whole big controversy of their findings, that were, although they didn't attribute this significant percentage of accurate questions asked on the board, they didn't attribute it to paranormal, but they still couldn't explain it.
Right.
Okay, so and I've done research on early Ouija board experiments conducted that were documented, in which blindfolded participants were able to hone in on the letter Z during their contact and during these scientific experiments. That's you can read about it. A lot of the stuff you can read about. I include screenshots and various commentary on my blog at Darren Evans Paranormal. But it's the first blog that really got people's attention back in 2008, and I find those. It's one thing if you've heard about the phenomenon and you haven't experienced.
Yes.
I get all kinds of stories from everywhere about. But it's those ones that, maybe it happened in the 50s or 60s or 70s, or even the 80s, And people send me crazy stuff. I was recently sent. There was a film in the 90s in which somebody sent me a clip of this film, and it's this character. And she says that Zozo is her father, and he guards the gates of hell. And that, I find that very striking when it comes to synchronicity and what's become known as synchromysticism.
Yes.
Which is we're evolving into things that aren't talked about as much, but what we find is in all types of literature and film, movies, magazines, cartoons, we find parallels, and we're able to look at things that don't really have a lot of esoteric meaning, but when it's combined with all these synchronicities, like Jake Cott's, I may have mentioned this in our last interview. I still find it fascinating today, this Oz-Zo relationship. And I did some digging into Hebrew, where if you have the letter O and Z, it produces a positive vibration. In Hebrew, each letter also has a corresponding vibration, color, and number.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but if you combine the opposite and you then switch those those characters and produce a zone. And I found this. It then produces an exact opposite of that positive energy and involves the dark side.
Yeah.
And so
I have to
when
wonder
you
if it's
start
not
looking,
some kind of ancient key.
exactly like Bryan said, we're dealing with something ancient.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there's
And it
no
keeps
doubt in my mind.
popping up
Yeah.
in various
Mhm.
forms, and it keeps building. And the problem is we can't really precisely identify or define Zozo beyond its trademark behavior patterns. You know, these thought forms, demons, jinn, inner demons, shadow, archetypes. You know, it could be a mixture of all of them. It may
Right.
be something else we haven't discovered, some type of interdimensional egregore, but, you know, it's one of the weirdest phenomenons, I think, that's ever happened, because so many people all over the world have experienced it, and then we find traces of its demonic heritage within the literature, through history, you know, and it jumps geographical and language barriers that we don't see in other words.
Right.
You know, and I find that very fascinating. You know, and I've always
It's
researched
definitely
it.
fascinating. I mean,
but-
you when you learn about the Zozo phenomenon, you're like, oh yeah, it's a Ouija board thing. But then if you decide to go down the rabbit hole of research, like if you read your book, it is fascinating to me about just how far back it goes, way before Ouija
Well-
boards were even a thing. So it is a
we can
fascinating
breathe a
phenomenon.
sigh of
and
relief, though.
yeah.
I know we're getting towards the end, and I want to bring up how this whole 2020 thing ties into the Zozo
Yeah, I was going to
phenomenon.
ask you that
Well,
next.
yeah,
So
that's-
let's go into
that's a
how
whole
does
podcast
that
by
link
itself,
up? Yeah.
Well, you know, in all honesty, in 2012, I published information that I'd received several reports of Zozo encounters on Ouija boards that foretold 2020 as an apocalyptic event. If you look on my original blog site at zozotheouijaspirit.blogspot.com, you'll see in 2012 I posted a screenshot. The post is entitled Zozo 2012 News Update. And this was back in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
In that screenshot, I write, so we are left with a lot of questions and not many answers. We may never know. One thing we do know is it's still happening with incurring frequency. Recently, some of the Zozo encounters sent to me via this site, it seems Zozo has an apocalyptic message or prophecy, not for the year 2012, but instead the year 2020. After reading these, I noticed 2020 was very similar to the name Zozo itself. Now, I wrote that in 2012. And in several emails that I shared with Rosemary, we came out with the book, The Zozo Phenomenon, in 2016. In 2017, we exchanged emails regarding descriptions of doomsday scenarios that were revealed in accounts sent to both me and Rosemary that promised, in one, it said that there would be a great coma in 2020. And so could this coma have meant, you know, kind of a corona situation?
Yeah.
You know, in another email, a mother from Minnesota reported a session in which she said Zozo informed her that it would be reborn again in 2020, that it was currently in a dream state, but would awaken from its slumber and cause the earth to shake in 2020. You know, this, I uncovered a lot of, you know, on Twitter, on March 16th of 2017, I put a post that said, many Zozo encounters reveal that the end of days will happen in 2020. There will be an eclipse that year. Well, it was during that eclipse that I lost my mom.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I
And
remember that
indeed,
when that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
2020, you know, I tweeted that in 2017 that many Zozo encounters reveal that the end of days would happen in 2020. And so I shared that with Rose. You know, we were going to come out with a book that really got into that possibility because of the eclipse that was going to happen in 2020. I mean, I had no idea that my mom would die on January 11th, you know, on 2020 during the first full moon of that entire
Right.
decade of the year 2020. It was known as the Wolf Moon, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so Rosemary emailed me back that she had gotten some emails about this. And then on November 3rd of 2018, I was hospitalized with a severe upper respiratory infection. I developed sepsis. I coughed up blood.
Oh my.
I damn near died.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I remember
And-
when you went to the hospital.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And so, you know, how important is it to close the session? And that's one thing that I even talked to you about when we met. You know, it's like, you know, it's like some people were kind of wanting to get, you know, blessed, and some, you know, I've always been the kind of guy. I mean, I really like to count my blessings.
Right.
You know, I'm not a demonic worshiper.
Right.
But you know what? You can call me to an investigation. If I get on a Ouija board, guys, there's going to be some really weird shit that happens.
Well, we saw that
So-
happen. But, you know, unfortunately, we are at the end of the show. So, Darren, I just want to say thank you for coming
oh my
on again.
gosh.
Yeah, it goes so fast. It really does. But thank you so much for coming on the show tonight and sharing all of that. We need to check up again with
Yeah,
you
Darren.
next season.
Definitely there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Appreciate you, Darren.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you so much.
I love you both.
Much
Take
love
care,
to you,
guys.
Darren.
Love you too, brother. Talk to you soon.
Take care. And for all of you out there, thank you for listening. That's the end of our season here for season 3 of Vestiges After Dark. We'll be starting up again sometime in late August or early September. But we'll have a between episode, a special episode on July 7th with Eugenie Bondurant from Conjuring 3. So make sure that you watch Conjuring 3 before we air that episode so that you can listen and nothing will be spoiled for you. All right, we'll see you then. Take care. God bless everyone.